these cuts real quick here. The biggest thing is just if you have something less than a 90-degree angle, you don't want to meet those cuts right at that corner there. So what I'll do is I'll find something, let's say it's a branch or what have you, I'll make sure I cut those lines first, and then as I'm cutting the background stuff, I'll just come right up to it, ease that cut to nothing, and then once you tool it, you won't even see that. Come real close. But then anytime you got something like a 90-degree or more, I'll make one cut and then come from that cut in any direction to finish that out. And then this is the same. It's just a whole bunch of cuts that are close, that don't quite meet. Circles, I don't quite do what they suggest. I'll move a little bit and then rotate the leather, holding my knife and watching the blade and rotating the blade at the same rate. And just kind of do that just to finish a circle. The little ones, that's where it really comes in handy for me anyways, is I barely touch that little tip on there. Little bit of a cut, turn, a little more, turn, and I go real slow and watch that cut so any adjustments can be made as I'm doing it. And when you're cutting something this small, don't go very deep at all. You're just scratching the surface. I do like my swivel knife to be pretty sharp. Otherwise it starts pulling leather and stuff, and when you're doing any type of fine detail, it just kind of muds it all up. There you go. I don't know. You guys want to give it a shot? I'll come walk around and see how it goes. Now the trick when you're cutting these boxes is to always kind of think in your mind where they are. They're sitting on the ground. What's in the background? Does it drop far back behind there? So if you guys want to step up here quick, I'll show you how I cut something like this. So as far as something like this one's sitting on the ground. This one is like a brick missing from the ground. So since this is right on the ground, these lines are just scratched in. These ones, because the background falls back behind there, we're going to need that lip, especially because that's a flat surface, a square object. We're going to need to actually go a little bit deeper right here. And then since we're getting closer and closer to where it's sitting on the ground, I'm cutting that line deep, but it gets shallow real quick to the point where it's just a scratch when it meets where the ground is. And I'll do this one a little more drastic to show you here. Real deep, and then just quickly gets shallow. But don't go that deep. Background, so that one's all deep. Now these foreground lines, and you'll see in this booklet here, it even tells you the depth of the cuts right here too.
Oh, yeah.
These ones, we're not going to tool at all, so just make sure barely scratching these ones in, because those ones are going to stay prominent and they're not going to get depressed down at all. And the same one with this one. Since that brick is missing from the ground where it meets the other side, that side isn't back behind there very far, so this cut's going to be real shallow right here. And then it gets deep where it falls back into the hole there. And then this one's going to be deep and then slowly get shallow as it meets that corner. These ones are a foreground edge, so both of those are just going to be real shallow. And the same with this double bevel line here, real shallow. Cool. All right, cut it up. All right. So again, this is just a small beveler. I usually just tap around the background. And then as I'm coming up to where that corner meets the ground, I go real light. I think what I'll do is this double bevel first. And in this booklet, all the pages are color coded as far as the double bevels. That's the depth of the bevels. And then here, the two boxes are even separated into different. So that represents the depth. The color kind of does as well, but we're doing that red double bevel line. So I usually just pick a side, knock that down, and then come back across the ground. And sometimes I don't go as deep. So you can always go back and go a little deeper. But then once I get that double bevel down, I'll switch to that small beveler. Like I said, as I'm coming around this edge, I go real light so that it meets that depth on that double bevel. Real light, and then get deep in there here. And after that, it's just a matter of taking this medium figure beveler and evening out those halos and blending that back. So you can see it's already kind of got that three-dimensional feel to it. If we knock that, if we knock that background down and then the ground coming towards us, make that look flat, then you got a brick that's sitting on the ground. And then as far as this one that's missing, I start with the small beveler again, right in this corner where those corners meet that back surface. You're gonna go real light. And then as it drops back in there, go deeper, just like the cut would represent. And I don't go too extremely deep because I know I still need to do that double bevel in the background. So I'll go deep, but I make sure you can still kind of feel, okay, you're saving some of those resources so you still have some depth to work with. I'll mat this down. And as I'm matting and coming up to these edges, I get less and less so that it just stops right at that edge, if not a hair before it. And then once that's there, hit this double bevel. And then just even it out. It's all about making these surfaces, like this surface here, I'm gonna just go across that a little bit with a modeling spoon or something just to make it look more flat. And the same with this surface and this surface. As long as those look relatively flat, you got your bricks and stuff. Pretty simple, I think. Same thing as kind of before here. This line's nice and deep until it starts to get close to the ground, and then you ease up so that it just meets a nice shallow cut coming back across this way. And then these windows, since you can see this surface is right behind the cut, same with that other one with the ground, it's nice and shallow, and then as soon as that surface drops back behind there, it gets a little deeper. And then at this point, it gets even a little more deep. so that as we're tooling, it already kind of has that depth reference and it kind of flows a little bit better. Deep, and then as we're coming around, that surface is closer, so I go a little more shallow, and as soon as I get to right where it meets, it's just a scratch. These foreground lines, like this other box, just a scratch. So we're not going to tool on either side of these lines. And that window is the same. This top window here, I added a little trick to it. So you can see right about here, it's nice and shallow because we can see that corner, but as soon as it drops back behind that surface, we get a little more depth. So that surface can fall back behind that line. And then these foreground lines are all just scratched in. And it's all in that booklet too. And once we get all that, it tools pretty much the same as that other box, because now we have a lot more going on. So we got to make sure we save these resources so that we keep that depth, so we have enough to work with. So what I usually do is just go modeling spoon, because if I come in with a beveler, I usually get a little too deep too quick. So these front surfaces are going to need to drop back and then go shallow where it meets in these corners. And then I'll just run my modeling spoon across them just to create that angle. And then just flatten it slightly. And where you have, the window has these curves to it, where this curve comes in, I'll just go a little bit deeper right there. So it kind of pops up on that elevated section. So same with this window here. Press down where it falls back a little bit more, and it gets real shallow up to the corner, and then just flatten it out and create that little bit, just enough angle so that it tricks our minds into seeing that three-dimensional shape.
Okay.
And I like to look at coins. You know, it's a great reference because they're using a very small amount of depth, and those images, they can look so 3D, it's ridiculous.
Did you bevel at all along these back lines?
Yep, so I just go a little bit shallow for that so that I save that depth when I come back in with a beveler and hammer that down. You still got a good amount of resources left. And this little window here, the tricky one, that corner is prominent until it gets about to there, and in the color-coded chart there, it kind of is a good reference too. So I'll just grab this down, probably about right there, and then give that angle like we did with the windows on the rest of that. Press that corner back down, and then it comes up real quick and meets that front edge. Same with this one. Get that corner back, create that angle. So then you're just creating the window. Now with the double bevel with this one, since we got so much more going on, I usually don't give it much at all. Just a tiny little bit. And this is another reason I like these pointed modeling spoons. It comes real handy in with those tree roots and stuff we'll do on the robot. But if you just take that point and just run it through that line so it's hitting both sides at the same time, then all you gotta do is clean up that halo a little bit. Don't go very deep, we gotta save these resources, and then even the ground out. You're already set. Because if I go in with a beveler, I'm gonna go too deep too quick. Go around the outside, then hammer down the insides. I've done the double bevel, I've done it without doing that inside double bevel. You know, sometimes just having the line there is enough to trick the mind into seeing that shape. But yeah, once you get the windows down, it's pretty good. Have at it. couch has a couple other lines that are a prominent green corner, and then they kind of fade around into a back bevel. Like this line here, that's a front corner, so we're not going to bevel it, and it's green like in the book. And then as soon as it gets to about here, that background surface falls back behind that line, so I go just a little bit deeper. Not much, I don't go very deep with any of my cuts. And then like with the other boxes, these cuts where the background falls quite a bit down, I'll go deeper. And then these bumps on the couch as well. And again, when we have all these lines coming every which way, if it's less than a 90-degree angle, don't completely meet those cuts together. And then we'll just do the same thing on here. That's a front prominent edge. And as soon as it gets to about here, that surface drops back behind there. So I go a little deeper. All right. Cut it up, and then I'll show you the tricks to tooling that. So like before, when you have a line that falls behind and then it transfers, it's like a reverse bevel on you here. So right here, it's back behind there. So we're going to bevel back behind that line, and then once it gets to about here is when that line becomes that prominent green line that we don't want to tool. So I'll define that spot, and then I'll come in with that medium figure beveler. I'll hit this down, but anytime like when we come to the corners or anything like that, you get close, you want to fade it. And you're better off fading it sooner than later because you can always come out a little bit longer. But if you go too far, it's going to look awkward in this area. So once you kind of define where that stop is, then you're going to smooth this halo out. But instead of just smoothing it out following the line on the couch here, you think about this side of the couch. So I'll kind of define that line too a little bit. So I'm going to be coming across to match that so that that roll appears to be coming from this side instead of just from that line where we beveled. If done correctly, it looks like that couch is flowing pretty well.
It does.
Yeah, looks like it's got that little dip.
Crazy, man.
Yeah.
Do that to the second hump, and then you just go around the outskirts like we were doing with those boxes. Fade the background out. And
So
don't...
we don't bevel the
No, I
lines
was
in there?
just gonna say, yeah. Don't do anything with the separation of the cushions until the whole couch has been beveled like that, and then we bevel the background and the double bevel around the ground.
Okay.
And then we just barely, I'll demonstrate that separately.
Okay.
But I would make sure to do this double bevel maybe first. And then if you look at the pictures where the shading and stuff is, this bevel right underneath that little teeny hump around the outskirts is a little different too here. It's a double bevel, but then that little cushion around the top edge, instead of like a straight double bevel, that one has like a roundness to it. So instead of evening it out like we did with the windows of the boxes and stuff, leave that bevel rounded.
Okay.
So it's yeah.
That I can do.
All right.
I can my own flattens.
So I just went around the outskirts just to define that bevel. I'll fade it out, do that double bevel, and then I'll come around here. All right, with this couch, since each one of these is rounded, I'll just come in and just tap that corner down just a tiny, tiny bit, just to suggest the roundness. And just by suggesting a little bit of roundness there, it just gives it that much more flow back behind. And I'll do that with all these edges, just a tiny bit. And then as far as each one of these separate cushions here, I'll grab this corner and tuck it back behind there just a tiny, tiny bit. and then just run this modeling spoon on that edge. Tuck that corner down just a tad, and then run it along that edge. And then it just separates it even more, kind of gives each cushion that roundness individually. Get rid of those halos a little bit. And then this one that runs across the whole length kind of comes in handy because we're doing this double bevel, and we can just fade that double bevel all the way up right to that edge. And then this whole surface will be matted down flat like when we did the boxes. And then this one, instead of trying to make it look flat, I'll tuck that corner down and barely touch that halo just to give that piece that roundness.
Do that the whole length of it? Or?
Yep, and then once that's flattened down, it'll really come out prominent, like it's an extra little cushion wrapping around that whole edge.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Fragmentary observation. So by looking at the different roots and things, what I want you guys to be able to do is to see like where the green line would be, where the high point, like when we were tooling those boxes, where we would be double beveling, and just kind of visualize these boxes we're seeing as you tool this image. If you flip a page or two ahead, I broke it down into different colors and things as well. And then there's the tooling depth with the shaded. So I'll go through the process and things, but what I want you to do while you're tooling is to think about where those green lines are, where that box would stop and the double bevel would continue and things like that. If you can slowly develop that, the ability to do that, you'll be set with just about any piece of art there is. All right, if anybody wants to come up here.
Don't make a mess. I can't hit the bag to save my life.
So like in the picture there, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, well that green line's about right here. Now I'm not going to bevel back on the top, just like we did that one other box. We didn't bevel the top of it at all. I'm just going to first pick out these double bevels, and I'm going to use my pointed modeling spoon again. And once you define that, work a double bevel in there a little bit, and then you can see on the pictures, like with this one or this one, where that blue shaded, that's going to be back beveled behind this root. And I'll just slowly start picking this stuff out. That double bevel. And because this is rounded, instead of leaving those sharp corners, all you need to do is just tap that line down a little bit. And where you see the root looks thicker right here, then it goes thinner, kind of thickens and changes its dimensions. I can just kind of grab a spot and work that bevel up a little bit here on that side and this side, so that almost starts to pop out as a knot. So we don't have to be nearly as accurate as we were with those boxes we were doing. And once I define that double bevel, I'll do this root too. And if you look here, we got a little bit of blue. So we're going to double bevel to about right here, back bevel. I'll smooth this out and mat all that down. And another thing I like to do before I get right up to this edge is dig down this blue all the way across the bottom. If you look at the example over there, you can see how deep I got right along here. Yeah. To really get that to pop out. That whole line across those rocks.
You beat the hell out of it.
I did. It went real deep. So as far as the double bevels go, you get that situated, and then as it comes up the tree, it'll actually be a double bevel on this side too. So they meet, and it's almost like a upside down V. You want it to slowly follow the shape of the tree at the same time, real narrow and shallow, and then deepen as it gets closer to where the roots come together. You can see it gets pretty deep right in here, and even right in here where these little roots come together. So right here, I'll get that pressed down a little bit, and then work that double bevel across. And if you want, you can go in with your figure bevelers or something like that, so you're not wrenching on your hand with the modeling spoon. Just do both sides, and then come across the root.
A figure beveler is a deep beveler?
Figure beveler has got kind of a unique shape to it.
Oh, okay,
And this is a medium size.
okay.
How come you left the mushroom out?
Huh?
How come you left one of the mushrooms out?
I don't know. I do weird stuff sometimes. Last time I left the butterflies out, I'm like, you know what?
They don't need to be in there.
Right. I would suggest getting all these double bevels worked in first and
Okay.
get that tree. You'd see, even with this one in between here, start real high. And then as it comes to the roots, it widens a little bit and goes a little bit deeper. So it almost would be, in these little corners, it's almost like a triple bevel in a sense. Because we have a double bevel meeting another double bevel, and then in between the two, it's going to fade down to flat.
Cool.
All right, I'll be walking around in a minute here. Another way sometimes to double bevel is I'll just bevel one side of the line with a small beveler and then just tap the other side down with my modeling spoon. once I get around them little roots and things, I'd take a look again at like page 25 here. You can see those rocks down at the bottom. There's a green line going all the way across. After I get those little roots situated, I'll go back over and just even everything out so that it's nice and flat and it appears that it's a nice flow underneath the roots all the way across. Making sure to leave that green line high. And I usually try to think about textures as well, like when we're doing the ground or roots. As I'm beveling, I try to have my beveler at an angle so where if I'm leaving marks and lines, that it just naturally goes with the ground or the tree roots or the bark or what have you. So anything I leave behind sometimes just adds to it instead of distracting from the actual flow. You can see the biggest space in between the most foreground here, in between those two roots. I'll come down and show you where what I was just saying comes in handy in the direction I hold my beveler at. So as I'm tapping, it just naturally puts the textures I need in there. Now we can add a little bit more detail. So what I would do is pick out where you can see this bump right here, like I was saying a couple minutes ago. Go around that one just a little bit. And it kind of pulls that knot out. Maybe grab something here. And then this root here, you can see it's got some pretty big knots. So I would go all the way around that one and let that come prominent. And then here too a little bit. Just a little bit, doesn't take much. Just a little bit to trick the mind into thinking it's got a lot more shape than it does.
Okay.
And I would probably smooth them out a little bit, but I left it rugged so you guys could really see. And then when you're dealing with these branches up top, I usually go straight to the medium figure beveler because when you have these two branches here, that dip is almost like a big double bevel that never comes to a point. So I would usually hold it and follow that curve as I'm twisting this tool, so any lines I leave again are just giving those bark lines and stuff. So I'll just go back and forth and I'll get lighter and I'll move it less and less because again, like the roots, that's going to be a V. And then once that's done, I would just tool around all the outskirts. And this other stuff with the details we can just add with the modeling spoon. And I'll come around and do all that. Cool. And once you guys get through the roots and things, when you start beveling around the perimeter of the tree, and you come across where his legs are right behind the root or his arm is right behind the trunk, I'll be beveling pretty deep because that sky can be back as far as we can get it. There's no other details we got to work in. But as soon as I get to the arm or those legs, I ease up quite a bit. Go real shallow. That way I can just fade that bevel out onto their arms, onto his arms and things, so it looks nice and flat. Then I still got tons of resources to slam down on either side and in the background. And again, I'd refer to a coin. if you look at a coin, how minuscule that difference in height can be, but our brain just grabs it and sees it in almost all its glory in the three-dimensional form. It's pretty crazy. So I like to think about that while I'm tooling, so then it keeps me from going too deep. It just takes a tiny bit. And the trick when you're doing tons and tons of detail is going shallow, and then at the same time, when you're fading something out to appear flat, fade it out as fast as you possibly can while still maintaining that flat appearance. Because if you flatten it out too far, you're just eating your resources up, and then by the time you get to the background detail, there's nothing to use. So, these little fingers, I would start by hitting the palm. His palm goes back behind the tree there. So I like to use this little teeny square tipped, but I'm sure the other one will work just fine. Get that palm back behind there. And then this first finger, actually we should do that first finger just a very, very light double bevel, and then hit this palm up because that's going to go deeper. And then from this point, since each finger is kind of behind the other, all I'll do is tap that finger down and move on down the line. Tap this one down just a little bit, and then this one. And this one's got a little bit of a double bevel since we're seeing more of it. And then just tap down behind it. And then I'll use my modeling spoon or something and fade all those bevels out so you don't see those lines. And then as far as his body goes here, where the arm comes into kind of the shoulder area, that's just a very slight double bevel. Hit that up real, real light. It doesn't take much. And the same with around the shoulder here. It's just a very slight double bevel. And then you can see the body falls back behind his arm until it gets about to right here. So I'm going to back bevel, and then once it gets to there, I have the arm meet that bevel, double bevel. This leg just falls back behind there, so I just do that and ease that up. Fade it out. And then this one again is another double bevel. Just real light, it doesn't take much. Think of that coin. You don't have to take too much resources to do any of this stuff. And just a little bit of a double bevel faded out across his body and his leg. This arm falls back behind. Doesn't take much. See, I'm just using a modeling spoon just to suggest that that falls back behind there. If I run across everything with a beveler, I just get too deep way too quick. And once you get that and you fade all that out, at that point, all you really need to do is go around everything with a beveler. And one other thing I do is I like that square tip one again for this kind of stuff. These little rings and things across his body, definitely don't take a beveler on those. I just barely run this right in that edge. I'm just barely touching it in there. And then just knock down that halo just a little bit. It doesn't take much at all. So the more you press here, the more you're going to have to work that halo out and stuff. All you got to do is suggest that shape. Just enough so that the brain sees that it's a little bit higher. Same with the lips. I think we're good. You guys can have a seat and get to it. I'll come walk around here in a second. So after you get, I know I'm getting ahead of everything a little bit, keep working on roots, whatever you want there, but the robot, just so we don't mistakenly round it off too much or try to bevel around the edges too much. Once you go around the outskirts of that robot, I just barely touch that sharp edge just to round that very, very end of that edge out just a tiny bit, and that's all it takes, and your mind thinks, okay, that robot's a sphere.
Okay.
Or more, a cylinder, I should say. So again, while we're tooling this, when you're looking at the roots and things, think about real life situations where you're seeing this stuff. Where would these green lines be? If that was into a box, where would that high point be? Think of these things as you're tooling. The same thing we're doing with that robot where we just tap down that very corner. We do that across the whole outskirts of the tree as well. So that's one of the reasons cutting these lines really deep isn't as big a deal. Like with those boxes, we need to make sure to keep that sharp edge. So you need to go pretty deep. The depth is real important. But with this kind of stuff, the depth of your cuts isn't nearly as important because we're going to want to round them edges off anyway. So if we're just scratching those in, those edges will get pulled down and rounded a little bit as we're tooling. One of these times I was going to try to do this stuff without cutting anything, just to see how it would turn out.
I think this one with the lines is very helpful.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Excellent. I was going to do more of that too. And again, if you're tooling something, look online and you can find that breakdown the three-dimensional cubes and things on just about anything.
Really?
Yeah. It really helped me out with hands. And you can see on one of those back pages for the final piece tomorrow, the little troll guy, his hand, if you look at it, you see the lines I drew, it's just a box. You know, once you get the box, you're good to go. It's just a matter of keeping those edges a little bit rounded. It's just this little square tip modeling spoon. And I like to think of about where the eye hits. You know, here's the front of the tree, so as soon as we come to this side, it's flowing away from us and vice versa. So if I'm doing this side, when it's straight on, I'll kind of hold it nice and flat, so I'm kind of hitting both edges of that little square tip. And as soon as I get to the one side, I tip it so that when I make a line, it's a bevel. Because when you're looking at a tree and you look at that side of that tree, you're going to see that sharp line and then it flows back from behind the line. Not much, but just enough. So like when we're doing the ground with the beveler from the one angle, it automatically does that for us. Same with this. As we're doing that, squiggly lines, overlap them. And as soon as I get towards the center of the tree, I level this out so I'm hitting both corners. And then as soon as I get to this other side, I tip it the other way. Oops, this way. So that bevel line always shows the flow going around the tree. One thing I like to do while I'm tooling and coloring or shading, an image starts to kind of get ingrained in your brain a little bit and you get used to it, and it kind of is, what you do is you take a picture of it and then you rotate, you make a mirror image on your phone or something of that picture, reverse it, then a lot of the stuff, the sore thumbs and things stick right out. And you can fix a lot of these mistakes. Another thing a lot of artists do is they'll have a mirror behind them so they can just turn around and see their painting in reverse.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Sometimes I'll even take the image and make it negative of it. And that kind of pops out a lot of shading and stuff issues so I can get the contrast right. Yeah, the thing I probably do the most is hold this up, let the light hit it different, or like have that light set up in front of it so I can see. Sometimes while I'm painting stuff, I'll actually set it up like on an easel or something so you can see it a little bit better.
Good to know. The cleaner name is going to be around for some good 2 minutes.
Oh yeah?
I don't think you'll see it. I don't think I will.
And once you get all the depth and things, you add a little detail here and there, separate some of those rocks a little bit. Sometimes I'll even take some pictures, reverse pictures or whatever, normal. And like if I'm done for the day, I'll go watch some TV or something after the kids go to bed, and I'll look at those pictures and just take some notes. Be like, I noticed this little spot needs something, or we get up the next day and work on it again. This is a little different because it's like a caricature, but it's a lot like you would do it if you were doing a real human's face. But I like to start with a pointed modeling spoon and just dig into these corners. This is going to be the deepest part. Dig into the one corner,
You say Elmer.
and then the opposite side. And you'll see at this point, you can almost see like there's a cylinder inside of his head. All we need to do is just barely tap each side of that cylinder to just round off the eye just a little bit. And just keep in mind that the eyeball in the socket's a lot bigger than what we're seeing. So if you go around the whole outskirts trying to make it round, it's going to look like a little pea inside of his head, you know, sitting in his socket. And don't do any of the iris or anything like that. That we wait and we'll cut in like towards the end. And we'll do the same on this side. Since this falls back behind that bridge of the nose a little bit, I'll go just a tiny bit deeper. And then this side is falling back away from us on the other side of the head. So again, I go a little bit deeper. And then tap the side of the head down just a little bit. And it'll be like a double bevel right in that crack. And then again, you can see it's like a cylinder in the socket. You just barely tap down each side on the top and bottom here, just to suggest that roundness inside there. And at that point, you know, you pretty much got your eyes. We'll create some more of the angles here where it drops.
You could get a piece of tape off of this end for your eggs.
Oh yeah, I could. I'll probably do that. This line here is a double bevel. Here, I'm gonna take that. If we look at the color-coded chart, it's kind of a modified double bevel. And you can even see it if you look at people's heads. It's kind of narrowed in right at that point across the temples. So I'll just grab that a little bit. And then on the bottom, it fades a little bit more than on the top. The top is a little bit sharper. And then from there, I usually grab the ear. So this whole side of the head, you can see on here, that green starts about right here. So if that was a box, this would be the green line right here. Across the front of the face. It comes this way and then drops. So this whole side of the face, when we tool behind the ear here, we're going to fade that up just to that point across his face. And the same all the way across the front of the ear. Just create that angle of the head dropping back. After you create that angle, fix this ear up. See that the head right here drops back behind the ear. So we're going to tap that corner down a little bit deeper so it really looks like it flows back behind the ear. I think that's probably a good spot to stop for you guys to catch up.
Okay. Can I borrow one of your monitors?
Yeah. So we got the ear and the eyes and stuff situated here. I usually like to get the head and the cheeks and stuff and work my way through the nose here. So I would probably start with the eye socket and just round it off a little bit, because if you got the bridge of the nose here, this side of the bridge is going to be angled a little, because you can look at, well, that picture shows it pretty good, the green and the orange right there. So you can see that that line across the nose is that high point, like in the boxes we did. So I'm going to angle that bridge of the nose and even bring it down past the nostril a little bit, leaving the nostril alone so that stays high. And then this cheek, like we already kind of did that double bevel there, comes out a little bit, and then right where the nostril comes around, most people have that wrinkle and smile line type of thing. So I'll tap that down and round that cheek off. So we kind of get that cheekbone going. This tends to be a little flatter on the jaw coming forward. And then from the pictures here, you can see it's almost like a Yoda mouth area. So this is going to kind of be like a bump out. So I'll finish going around the nose. The back of the nose goes a little bit deeper. Don't go too deep. You want to save resources. The deeper you go, the more halo we got to blend out. So just enough to give that inclination of that face dropping behind the nose. Smooth it out just enough so it appears to be flat. And then I'll dig in to each side. And this one overlaps just a little bit, this little line here. Round it off. And this cheekbone, same thing, because that double bevel, like on this side, that double bevel is going to be on that side too. And then I'll angle the cheek back just a tiny bit, so it still looks like it's flowing back behind the head. Create that angle going in towards the eye. And then right underneath the mouth area here, you can see it's like a modified double bevel. So I'll just tap that down, letting the chin stay prominent. And even a little bit on this
And when you
far
say
end.
modified double bevel, you mean deeper on one side than the other?
A modified double bevel is basically any kind of bevel that's not the standard V, flat on both sides. But in most cases, when I'm talking about a double bevel, it's one side is flat and evened out all the way back across, and then the other side a lot of times will be almost like a rounded.
Okay.
So you could almost, with a modified double bevel, you could almost just run across it, bevel one side, and then just tap that one other side down so it's rounded. And once we get that chin popping out just a little bit, let's get that nostril too. And then you can see too that this nostril, we're going to need to drop it back just a little bit behind there so it pops out. I think we'll stop right there and let you guys dig into that. At this point, I would just round the head back a little bit. Not too much, save those resources. So then the head kind of drops back.
Did you do a little beveling there too on that head?
Just right here a little
Okay.
to see how well my leather was cased. And then that ear falls back behind. But don't bevel that too deep, because we're going to still need to go around the outskirts and then the rocks on top of that. So the face is pretty much done, maybe in between the brow, a little bit of a double bevel, and then go back behind the brow. Just a tiny, tiny bit. It doesn't take much. Just got to suggest that shape. Again, think of a coin. It doesn't take much to really see a three-dimensional.
Yep.
Doesn't take a whole lot to get those shapes going. And then from that point, I would just background around behind the head, and then we'll dig into this. This is another example right here of where we don't want to fade the halo too much, because we have that bevel right here, and his shoulder pops up and forward, and so does this material here. So I'll just leave it like that, because then it still maintains that nice shape to it. And same on this side. I don't fade that bevel too far at all, because then we can come across right here and it maintains a nice three-dimensional shape without eating any extra resources out. I would do that, go around the head. I'll come around and check and give some more pointers and stuff here. Just make sure when you're going in between the brow, go real light. You can always go a little deeper. So clothes can be kind of forgiving because they can be pretty random, a lot like a tree can be. I'd probably separate the jobber he's holding here first and fade that a little bit. But as far as the shoulder goes, it's like a double bevel. It doesn't have the orange on the picture there, but this would be just a slight modified double bevel. Don't go too deep. You can always go deeper if you need to. And then the whole side of his body, like if you were to think of him in the fragmented form, that green line for the box would come right about here. So just like the side of his head, we're going to angle the body back behind into the pit there and just follow that line all the way down. And then I'll grab all these little fabric rolls and things. This one tends to kind of go back behind it a little. Same here. Maybe this one's up on top more. So we'll go on both sides a little bit. And this is one of the cases where I'll get some of those details in, and then I'll move to a different section and let that rest a little. It kind of settles out a hair, and then I'll bevel around the outside of it. And then like with this sack he's holding, you can see there's like a roll of fabric that's kind of hanging over his arm. So this one's going to be kind of a medium depth double bevel. On the way up, it fades pretty quick, and I can see I got another roll of fabric right here. So I won't fade it too far where that roll is, but alongside of it I will. So I'll leave that little chunk of fabric high. And then the piece that's rolling out comes at us real quick and is popping out. So I'll just barely tap that edge down. And then it kind of flows behind there a little. And then this is another double bevel. And that's kind of rounded. So if you look at this, there should be a little more green, but that orange tells us that modified. So instead of a nice V, we're going to create that line and then just pop it up real quick so it keeps that roundness. And then it drops, this side drops back behind there. And then just bevel this line. And again, because that arm has a roundness to it, and if we were to think of that in like a box form, that's almost right where it needs to be, that halo already. So I'll probably just leave it like that and get these rolls and stuff in there, where the fabric falls back behind there, and work those fingers in. Some of that fabric pops in front of that one. This finger overlaps that back one, so I'll bring that bevel up onto his knuckle. And then what I do, if you look at the fragmented picture of this, that hand is done. This one would be similar. So that green line would be about right here to form that box shape for that finger. I'll just bevel right here, just knock that down, and then come from the other side and just create like we did with the roots with that tree, just a miniature version. Bring this finger down into that double bevel, but I'll fade it real quick so it doesn't go past where that green line would be.
Okay.
Guys want to have at it? And you can feel free to dig into the rest of the clothes in the bottom of the baby or sack of potatoes, whatever it is. You go ahead and do his other hand. I would suggest going to that page with the boxes and things drawn across it. So what I like to do, again, I mentioned it before, is that side of his thumb is going to be dropped back behind there. I'll just go around these edges. The other side of his thumb is a double bevel, but I'll still just bevel around all these fingers. And then even it out. And as I'm evening this out to fade that halo, so that side of the finger needs to be up high. But this side of the thumb is like a double bevel, so I'll just tap that down like with them tree roots so that it meets that double bevel line. And the same with this side of the finger. Create that side by meeting that double bevel. And then this one too. Make that angle. It meets in that cut. So that's how I do that. And just like those roots, and in that drawing we have all the squares and everything, and it kind of shows us what we're doing. I'll start to grab parts that need to be cleaned up. You know, some of these wrinkles on the sleeve, I'll grab something pointed and just kind of create some more of those lines, clean up some of those marks. And then, like with his little sleeve here, it drops back around behind his hand, so it doesn't take a whole lot. I'll tap that down behind the finger, just a tiny bit, and then press the background down just a little bit more. I mean, it doesn't take much at all. And then once you do that, a little bit more. Once you do that, I mean, those little minute details,
Make all the difference.
yeah, they really pull everything together. Getting all the little rolls and folds and angled just right. You know, it's almost not even noticeable. But if you really go in there and nitpick, you can notice little things like that. And it really does add to the picture. Maybe add some more wrinkles and things. And that can pull more of this stuff together too here. The tops of like this collar piece, again, like where the head falls back behind the ear, each one of these corners kind of fall back behind the shoulders. So I'll tap those down just a little bit. Doesn't take much, but that just adds even more to the whole feel.
Yeah.
Things like that. So just go through it and kind of see what maybe could be fixed. Add some wrinkles, this or that. Little details really pull everything together. All right, so kind of the same thing we did before. Dig into those corners. And what I like to do is have this tool at the right angle. If I'm coming in like this, it's going to look like the eye's flowing up like this. So I try to match those angles.
You have the spoon side down there, is that right?
What now?
The spoon side is down?
Yeah, I never have it flipped up this way.
Oh, I
Okay.
did mine that way. That's why it looks dorky.
And again, you go a little bit deeper when you're getting these corners in there. And then you see that cylinder, just barely tap those edges to make it round. And make sure it looks more like that ball in the socket is bigger than the socket itself. Like I said before, if we go around the whole thing trying to round it off, it looks weird and like the tip protrudes. And then this eye that's missing, I just jam it in. And then the bottom section of the socket you'll leave heading back into the piece. This nose needs to be beveled a little bit. Then pretty much the rest is like double bevels. And like we did before, we're going to create that double bevel a little bit more steep up top and then we even it out a little bit from this corner, so it's a little bit more of a surface. I'll come in with the point of this, I won't go either side. I'll come in nice and flat and just hit both sides on the ear and the head at the same time. And then even that ear out, flatten it out. And then this only fades up so far, almost has that L shape to it. A little bit more on the jawline because this cheekbone stays prominent. This section of his face kind of pops out a little bit, and then we got this laugh line. And then again, this cheek is rounded slightly, and then you can see where like the mandible area here comes out in front of that cheek a little bit. Then I'll come from the nostril and even that bump out. And again, like we did before, create that chin so that the front of the chin protrudes just a little bit. Bridge of the nose again. Create that angle coming up to that line where the highest point would be. And then you can dig down behind the nostril a little bit too. It's hard to see from upside down. There we go. Just to define that a little bit more. I think that's a good stopping point. You guys can dig into that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it makes so much difference.
This is where that breakdown will really help, seeing where these lines and things end. So let's just start with his neck, that main sternocleidomastoid, this main muscle that comes across right here. This one's going to be the most prominent. We'll start with that one, and we will have a couple more coming off of there. So we'll bring this one. It starts almost behind the ear, and then comes up in between the clavicle here. There's going to be a small depression, and then we'll want to make it appear like that other one is going off that other way. And it almost fades to nothing up at top towards the ear here. Fade that bevel out. And then we'll start separating some of these other muscles coming off and underneath. Bury that point right in here to separate the two, and then carry that one off of there. And it's the trapezius muscle, this back one here, is nice and rounded and comes and flows right up over the top. The neck's going to drop back behind his head, so we'll depress that down. But separating all those little muscles, don't dig too hard with the sharp edges and things. Keep it real natural, smooth. Hold the tool flat, and then we'll just bevel across the bone there a little bit. And they start and separate, but then by the time they're getting like towards the collarbone and stuff, they almost kind of fade to nothing. You can see how they, on this one, they just kind of fade out to nothing. Still a little high right here. It almost has a curve to it, the sternal right here. Separate a few of those. Might as well do the shoulder here while you guys are up here. We're going to dig into the other side of the bone. Even it out. Now if you look at the color-coded part, that shoulder, this whole section is raised up. So I'll come around that first, keeping the tool real flat, maybe even hold it like this. Real flat. Just to get that section to raise up. And then we'll even that out. The bicep here is like a double bevel. It's going to come across to about here. Like this is the high point right here. So we're going to grab this double bevel, and like we did with those windows in that box, we're going to fade that angle all the way down, leaving this the high point. And then round that bicep coming up. And give that just a tiny bit of an angle. round this side off a tad. Just a little bit. This bone here pops out just a tiny bit. And usually with forearms, if you just give it a couple little definition lines, have it fade, usually I want you to look at those boxes and things that I drew down. I drew them kind of to the extreme so you could really tell where the boxes and stuff were. Don't bevel stuff quite as deep as you would think you would need to looking at that reference. It just needs to be kind of faint, and you can see on the example there. Just faintly suggest all these shapes and things underneath his skin, muscle textures and whatnot. And this whole line here will be beveled down, and then that bevel will be brought out to about right here. And that again will be on that reference.
To make them boxy looking.
Makes them.
So yeah, you could basically come right up to the point to form what it's shown in that reference, and then just round that off a little bit, and then you're done, you know. Once you guys dig into that stuff, the neck and the arm.
I think the barge is flowing freely in there.
That was energetic.
So you can see what I did with the one arm here. Right next to it I beveled, and then I brought that bevel out so that it fades all to this line right here, coming all the way down his torso.
Okay.
So that it forms that boxy section of his torso. What I'll do is just take the point of this to create that double bevel real quick on his pectorals, and then even that out across the abs there.
You make
Let's
it
do
look
this.
so easy.
Yeah.
I've done this piece how many times now? Anyways, the tummy here's got a little bulge coming over the belt. So that double bevel will actually fade pretty far down, but it will maintain that roundness. And all the abs are pretty flat. And we can detail them up in a couple minutes or whatever. But for this side, take this sharp bevel that, and then fade it out to that line, which is demonstrated in your book. And even on the color one, you can see it's pretty straight across.
Yeah.
Same on this side. When you get up here, there's not much a difference in depth. So I'm going real light. As soon as I just use my small beveler. I already did that side, but I just kind of run it along.
Was this another building in the foreground? It looks like
Yeah.
a big onion.
Yeah, it's like a little hut.
Okay. Oh,
We could work that
There's all
in
sorts
first
of
if you
little
want.
details in there.
yeah, there is.
Yeah. Somebody was laughing when I told them to cut and to tool that little well there. They're like, yeah, all right, just smash. I'm not doing that.
I'm done.
All right. I separate each one of these shingles and pick it up and move it, holding that line. Pick it up, set it into the next shingle, then it gets that step real nice. And then once I get that, we got a double bevel here. So I think I'll just do modeling spoon. You can use a beveler or something if you want. I like to use the point like I did with those tree roots. Just right in there, instant double bevel. Smooth that out across the shingles. We want that to appear to be flat. And then it's kind of tricky to get this back facet, just a little bit of the back bevel there. And then this line here is actually a double bevel. And I'll depress that in real good and then fade that back to meet that line into that double bevel. And do the same right here. Get one side good and then just fade that in to meet it. And then what we'll do is come across this whole section here and flatten that out like in the example here. Get that to be flat. And then we'll do the same with this one here. You can see that the doorway from this side, that's a double bevel. And once it gets to about here, it reverses into like a back bevel there. And the same here on this side, that's a back bevel. It's going to drop back behind there. And as soon as it gets up towards the top, then that's going to turn into a double bevel. Bevel both sides of
I
that.
hit a tinier point.
Yeah. Once we get that shape of the house down, then I back bevel around the whole thing and really get that back and deepen in there and touch it up as I'm going. I find that if I back and bevel the background before I start putting details in, sometimes I eat up too much of those resources and start going too deep as I'm putting all the other stuff in. So like I said, fire, a lot like water and stuff. If you cut it, it's too defined. So I'll go around it, maybe cut the base just a little bit. But all these little stones, right here is where the fire starts and there's where it ends. So I'll start just picking out stones. And just to make it random, I'll grab one over here, and then as I'm filling it in, I just throw one behind that one part way. I'm not even really following what's drawn on there. I'm just putting stones in here randomly. And then it kind of falls behind this hill a little bit, so I'll add that line in here. And then one of them kind of is popping up on the hill here. And just slowly adding them in. And a couple will pop up just a little bit over that ridge. Just kind of overlapping little circles, oblong circles. And that's that. And then the fire itself, just kind of create a couple little different facets. And this bottom will be a very slight double bevel, even it up onto the flames. And then distinguish the edges. Okay, it doesn't take a whole lot. And by not cutting, it keeps that fluidity to it. I like to work that ring of rocks in first as if it was just a ring. And then once I get the form, just like in that fragmented observation, instead of seeing all the individual rocks right off the bat, I just see a ring sitting there. I tool that ring in, and then I separate the details into little rocks and stuff. Sure, why not? Once you got that waterfall matted down so it's nice and even coming across there, I'll just turn it so that anytime you're looking at something, if you have your pointed beveler pointing towards you, then anytime you make a line, it naturally has that drop off and bevel back, because that's how you would see it in real life. if I came from this angle, it wouldn't be realistic. So what I do is I grab it from this angle and I just keep flowing around that corner. I grab the edge and just keep adding lines, hitting that edge. And then it gives the impression of that waterfall dropping off. And water isn't just super uniform either. Some of these lines can be a little weird. Maybe there's a rock under there or something. It doesn't take a whole lot. Just by grabbing that and pulling it across, it makes it flow.
You can almost hear the water crashing.
And then the mist. Like I said earlier, don't fade that bevel off that across that mist because it's raising up so quickly. What I do is I grab that figure beveler and we leave this halo there because that mist is rising up as that water is hitting and colliding. I'll just grab these different little bubbles and things, mist clouds I should say, and just start separating them. That's almost too defined. Well, maybe not any bad. Sometimes I'll go back across it and kill some of the definition with the modeling spoon. And the trick to doing the open ocean, first I'll explain the halves rule. And how that works is, let's say you're making some waves. If you go halfway back in your picture, at that point the waves will be half the size. Then you cut that section in half, and that'll be half the size of the previous waves, and so on. And the more you go back, the less of a point they'll be. They'll start to flatten out too visually. And to depict a wave, if you have a figure beveler, it's actually pretty easy. That's a flat, so I'll just tip up where that point of the wave will be, and then tip it into where the point would be. So it's deeper right at that point of the wave, and then tip it from the other side. And that natural curve of that figure beveler makes a pointed wave. Now the real big ones that are up close, I'll tap it and bring it out and fade it out just a little bit so that it looks a little bit larger. So that one would be like right in here. Pretty big wave. And just keep tapping them in. So when you go about halfway back, it's going to be about half that size. Not as defined. Halfway back, it's going to be half that size. And even flatter. And just slowly fill it in, randomly. And if you want to get real complicated, when you're up close especially, you'll have a real big wave. And then in that wave and in between waves, you'll have more little waves all over the place, especially in real choppy water. But the most important thing being that halves rule. Make sure your waves get smaller and less defined as you go back.
And the mist comes up to where his hands are covered.
Yep, yep. And you could even bring that mist a little further back so it looks like he's more standing in it instead of waves right here. A little more mist. So, one more thing on the board here. So you got the idea of the point of the wave. Now when we start defining all those points, the halves rule comes into play. They get a little flatter. We're going to be adding more in. At this point, it's going to be quite a sharp point. It's going to fall back behind there pretty quick. As we come towards the flat area, that point flattens out more and more and more. So it's going to be less of a bevel, and then by the time you get here, it's really nothing. You're just going to have to basically fade. This will fade basically into these other ones. It might still have a little bit of ridges and stuff, but it should look rolling. It should not be a hard defined ridge. So I usually don't cut mountains if they're far in the distance either. I don't have a preference either way. So I'm just getting rid of that extra little rock outcrop right here. And kind of like with the shoreline, I'm gonna double bevel, but I'm gonna go a little deeper. And I am gonna fade that up instead of like the shoreline where it was pretty abrupt. That way the mountains look like they're popping up out of the water. And I will probably tap this water down just a little bit with a modeling spoon. Just round it off so it looks a little more flowing back into the distance. But I like to leave it a little bit pronounced. Maybe I would take it down a little more than that. That still looks like it's popping up in the water too much. So I would probably even that out a bit. But let me get into this rock first. Just a small beveler. Go around the outskirts. Then obviously you would even that halo out, flatten it up. But then I just take once I go around the whole thing, I'll take a modeling spoon and just kind of grab stuff and be like, all right, well, it looks like that rock comes out and then comes back into a double bevel here. So I'll just do something like that. That little section looks like it'll fade back. And maybe I'll leave that chunk like that. You know, rocks are pretty random like roots. You can kind of be sloppy. Sometimes it turns out better. This whole facet looks like it's kind of like a shelf right there. So we'll do something like that. Maybe round that off a little bit. This one looks like it wants to go back. Maybe we'll separate that a little bit. I'll just kind of hop into it, and I was pretty sloppy, and you can see it just kind of visually looks normal. Looks like a rock face. It has a bunch of different facets. Doesn't take a whole lot. So that's one of the reasons I put all these crazy little rock faces. Even if you don't do them here, just go home and respray that part and just kind of test and mess with it and see how you like doing different angles of things. And I think that little lesson with those rocks will really help looking at all kinds of other stuff and just seeing that three-dimensional form.
Okay.
You were going to do the mountains too.
Oh yeah, let me finish these mountains up. Once I fade that bevel enough so they look relatively flat, I will separate the different sections here, and you can see like this one kind of drops back. So does that one. And it's got like those prominent edges to them. Once you kind of define that stuff, get the different facets in there. Then I would just heavy bevel around the whole thing. That whole skyline I'm going to smash down pretty dang flat.
Yeah, you backgrounded it here.
Yeah. And this one, because I didn't have anything behind it, you can see the border started to pop up a little bit around that section because it was compressed so much.
Yep.
But if you do that foam trick I was telling you about, put that behind there, you can depress it more than that even, and you won't get any of that stretch and flaying out.
Yep.
Cool?
Good.
Play ball.